Hey everybody, like Kyle said, my name is Nathan Kern and I work with Oasis Digital. I've been working with Angular for 4 or 5 years now, and we like to branch out to dive deep into some other topics. So I'm going to explore today what Storybook is and how you can use it. And this is going to be, I'll go ahead and start sharing. This is going to be kind of a sequel to a talk I gave a little while ago on using NX to publish Angular libraries. If you go to YouTube and just search Oasis Digital, you'll find our channel. And then if you just search NX in our channel, you'll find we have a couple different videos. Kyle talks a little bit about NX, and I believe this one. And then Chris gives a really good, one of our colleagues at Oasis as well, gives a really good overview of a lot of the really nice NX features. So we're starting out this talk. The idea is we're going to use Storybook to help have a showcase for some components we've already created. And so I'm going to go ahead and pop a link in here to help explain what's going on. In your chat, I'm going to put the link to the repo that I'm going to be going through. And let's see. I can never figure out how to get to chat when I'm sharing. Here. So this is the repo. It's just on GitHub. Nathan demo co is the repo, and this Storybook Markdown file is what I'm going to be walking through. And this is going to have basically everything I'm talking about in here, as long as each step. And I have the steps are labeled with branch names here. So as I go through each step, I have them branched off. So if you need to go back through this, you can go from branch to branch to watch the progression of how I put this together. Okay, so the point of this is to use Storybook in an NX mono repo. And for those that aren't familiar with NX, it's kind of an extension of the Angular CLI, and it helps group multiple libraries and apps together in a way that they can work together easily and all share dependencies. And additionally, they have plugins that can make your life easier when you're adding things like Storybook, and that will become a little bit more apparent as I go through this. And then so Storybook is, I can show this. If you just go to learnstorybook.com, Storybook at its core is just a tool for showcasing the elements and whatever, showcasing components and whatever you're building. It can be for an app or a library. We're using the context of a library here because one of the hardest things about after you've built a library is showing people how to use it and having really good documentation. So if we go to learnstorybook.com and we just pull down the guides, we can click on Intro to Storybook, and you'll see that Storybook isn't Angular specific. It's actually built with React. So you'll notice if you start using it, a lot of the docs are kind of point to React examples, which make it a little confusing. And but they do support a lot of frameworks, and that comes with its benefits, like positives and negatives. With so many supported frameworks, keeping those all that documentation up to date can be difficult. So you'll see that a lot of times that the Vue and Angular documentation kind of lags behind. And so that's why I wanted to focus on kind of configuration and get everything set up, because it can be really tricky and confusing. But so this is where you can go to learn more about it and more about the different features. And so for most libraries, before Storybook, what you would usually do is create some sort of demo app, and to demo what these components can do. And so this is an example. This is a library I have, and before I learned how to use Storybook, this is what I did. I went through and so this is CRISPR Forms. It's just a form generator, but it has a lot of fields in this. So it has the library itself has an input field, a text area field, all these different fields. And so in order to create this app, in order to demo and try to document this for people, I had to go through and create a whole new demo app with routes for all these components and examples. And so you'll see in here, I have an input field and I have all these different kind of examples. Here's what a text one would look like, a number one. And so I had to kind of generate all these fields and examples. And even though I did all this work and created all these routes and pointed to all of them, it's still not super clear what's going on. And in this context here, it's on StackBlitz. So it has the benefit of a user could go in and start modifying this and playing around with it. So that's nice. And so they could change it, but understanding how to do that is kind of difficult. So if I was kind of naive to what's going on here, I wouldn't know exactly what to do. I wouldn't know that I need to go. So I'm in this fields route here. So I need to go over to this example under the fields directory, find the input, and now I can manipulate some of the usage here. But that's not really transparent to the consumer. So using a demo app like this has advantages, especially if you are in some sort of organization. You can use, with many teams using your component library, you can use your demo app to showcase best practices for your organization, how your organization wants to use Angular. And this is a great place to do it. But as you can see, even with all this work that I've put into this, it's not really a great set of documentation. Even though I've made examples for all these different fields, how to use it isn't super clear right now. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And so today, I'm going to show you a different way. We're going to try the Storybook way. And so I have a completely different component library that I'm going to be using. This library only has one component, and the library is called Editable. And the idea here was to create some components, some input and output components that we could use to edit documents in line, similar to like a Jira ticket issue, where you only want to upgrade or update one property of that Jira ticket. And so I'll show you what it looks like. And so because I didn't want to go through all the hassle of making different routes and having building out this whole demo app for this example, I just simply put it in the app component here, just to show an example of how it would look in a demo app. And you can see that if I go back here. So this is the displaying state for this component. It has this little indicator here to indicate that it's editable. It has some initial value. I click on it, it goes into an editing state. I can change this value. If I hit enter, it goes into an updating state, which is those little spinner you saw. And then after a little while, that goes away. And so that's the main functionality of it. The one other piece is if I start making some edits and I hit the escape button, it will undo those changes and go back to its value, or the initial value that was in it. So if we take a look at this component real fast, it's pretty simple. We have a type defined for our states. We have an editing state, an updating state, and a displaying state. And that's an input down here. That's our state input. And that's how we change change it from a text input to the to having that edit icon and the updating icon, and that's how we manipulate those. And so you can see here that the parent of this component is actually going to be driving the state. We want this component to be pure, so we're having just inputs and outputs and as little internal state as possible. And then we have this host binding for the background color, and this is an input as well, and we're defaulting to some purplish color here. And this will take anything that that is a valid CSS color value for background color, and we're just binding that to the host. And this is kind of a silly one input, but I wanted to, you'll see later why I use this. It will be used to highlight some of the controls Storybook gives you. The next is our text value input. This one's a little bit more complicated because I wanted to use a form control on this. And so when this changes, it just simply updates the value of the form control here. You see that form control right here. And so these are the three inputs it has on it. It has an initial value of an empty string, and then we have a few outputs. So the one output is update text. That's what fires when you hit enter or tab on from editing mode, and that will emit the value that's in the input. We have a cancel output that fires, and that fires when you hit the escape button when you're in editing mode, and that will just fire an event. It's not going to change the state in any way. It's just going to let the parent know that the editing has been canceled. And then start edit is what fires when you click on the component here, and puts it into editing mode. Okay, so this is a pretty simple component, and then these methods, the only methods here that does anything besides kind of proxy to those outputs is this initiate update text, and that just grabs the value from the control so it can emit that value. If we take a look at the HTML here, you can see that when we're in editing mode, we show this input, and then this input will fire some events. When you hit enter, it fires the update text event, tab fires the update text event, and escape cancels it, like we talked about a little earlier. And then when we're not in editing mode, we're just showing a paragraph with that text inside of it with some icons. And so again, that state will change, will drive either an editing icon or the edit icon for when it's displaying the value to indicate that you can edit the control. And then this updating is to indicate that the state or the control is in the process of updating. And so I just dumped this into my my demo app here. So I have my demo app, and my library is down below. And we see that we're just we're using this. We're hooking in. We're using this component. We're hooking into the outputs to handle them. This update text is the only one that takes a value, and that's the value of that's in the input. And then we have a couple inputs here. We're using this editable state to drive the state of the component, and the text value to pass whatever value we want to display on the screen. And so so our app component here is handling these different events. When we tell it to start edit, so these are the properties on the app component that we're using to drive our editable text component. We are setting it initial.
Cut that out. Not yet. Just put in the
Is that a question?
I think somebody was just accidentally unmuted. I'm going to try to spot anybody that's accidentally unmuted and mute them.
And so here in our app component, these are just the properties we're using to drive that editable text component. We're initializing it as displaying because we just want it to look like it's kind of displaying the value we have inside. And then we're passing some text value into the component. Probably help if I did this. So this some initial value is the value being passed into it. And then the editable state is what's driving the actual state, the view state of this component. So when the handle, when the start edit event fires, it fires off this method on the app component. And all that does is change the state to editing. So when I click on it, that event fires. And now we're in like an editing mode and I can make changes. And then when I hit either enter or tab, it changes the value of some text so that property gets updated, changes the state to updating. So we saw the little spinny circle, and then after 2 seconds, it changes it back to displaying. And then if I hit cancel, all it does is change that state. So I tried to make this complex enough that we could highlight all of the positives and negatives of Storybook, but also simple enough that hopefully it can be kind of easily digested. Did anyone have any questions on the component or what's going on with this? And the main thing to point out is that doing any action that I'm taking on the component isn't in itself changing what it looks like. It's the parent that's driving the state. The parent is changing what happens to the component because we want to keep this as pure as possible and as reusable as possible. Okay, and so looking back at the stack blitz example I showed before, if I was going to use a demo app, I would start creating routes for this and trying to figure out a way to show all the different ways that this works and kind of segregating this out into a proper demo app. But we're not going to do that. So all I've done so far is I've gone to the repo and I've checked out, I've cloned it in, run npm install, and then I've checked out this branch of editable library. And then I branched off of that and called it Angular Lunch. So this Angular Lunch branch is what we're going to be going through today. And it's just a branch off of editable library because we don't want to make any commits to this branch. We want to keep that as it is. And then I've gone through and I've done a little bit of configuring. So I went into, started the first step. I just npm installed -d at Norwal /Storybook. And that's all the Storybook stuff we need to pull in the schematics and the plugins into NX. And then I've installed the Storybook add-on essentials. And this is kind of a conglomeration of useful Storybook features that they've dumped into one package to make that a bit easier. And so this is the only step I've done so far. All I've done is pull this in and run this npm install because you guys don't want to sit there and watch that. So the next thing is to, I'm going to go through and I'm going to stop this app. And I'm actually going to make a little bit more room in my terminal. Pull this out of the way. And so now I'm going to make use of one of NX's plugins here. So I'm going to run NX as the command. G is for generate. You can say generate. And that's going to be at Narwhal Storybook. I'm sorry, at Narwhal Angular : this is a long one, sorry. But again, all these commands are in that repo under the Storybook MD. Storybook -configuration. And then I pass the project name. And again, my project is editable here. So the NX workspace has a place for your apps and a place for your libs, and my project name is editable here. So editable, and I'm going to run that. And this is going to do quite a few things for us. So because we're not going to talk about integration with Cypress, but you can absolutely integrate your end test into your stories. And so we're just going to go ahead and say yes for all these. This is going to tell it to configure Cypress to run against our Storybook instance. This is going to ask if we want to generate some story files for each component in our library. So whether we have 1 or 100 components in our library, this will generate a story for each one of us and get us some boilerplate going. And then this last one is to create a spec file for each component. So I'm going to say yes to all those because this will get us set up for Cypress integration, and that's a really nice feature. And you can kind of already see a lot of the stuff that's happening for that Cypress integration. I'm not going to dig deep into that, but we can see all of these with the editable E2E on here. These are all for integrating Cypress. So you can see a little bit of a picture of what these NX plugins give you and how much boilerplate they can help take care of for you. Because this would be like a whole new set of learning to do to figure out how to get this all set up properly. So I'm going to kind of wave my hands at that part, but we're going to point to some of the Storybook related things that's happening here. The first thing that happened was it created this .storybook folder up here. And this is going to configure Storybook for the entire workspace. So any features that you want to share across all your libs and all your apps that are using Storybook will go in here. And so right here, it's just adding this add-on knobs. It's one of the add-ons they have available. And this is how you can configure some of the add-ons kind of in a global manner for everything in your project or everything in your workspace. And then this is just telling it to exclude spec files. And then in the Webpack config, it actually ejects the configuration and allows you to make any changes to the configuration that you might need to. I haven't had to do this, but it's just nice to know that it's there if you need to make some changes to the way Webpack's building. So now if I go close my apps folder down here, I go down to the editable folder. There's also a .storybook directory created here. And this is the configuration that's going to apply just to this project. So again, we have another main.js file. And this is going to tell Storybook what files we want it to build. And so we're basically telling it anything in this folder that has this .stories suffix, and then we're going to grab a few file types. One is MDX, and we'll come back to MDX at the end. MDX are kind of a combination of Markdown and JSX files, and they're pretty useful. And then as well as any JS, JSX, TS, or TSX files with that Storybook or that stories suffix. And so this is just telling it how to build itself out. The next file that was created was this preview.js, and we'll use this to configure any extra add-ons for Storybook that we want. Right now we're using the knobs add-on, and that was done for us by that schematic that we ran, and we'll see what those do in just a second. And so that's the configuration I'm going to go over. And let's take a look at what an actual story is for Storybook. So we go into our lib again, go into our components, and we see this new file here. We just had a TS, a spec, style, and HTML template file, and now we have this stories.ts file. And this is generated for us by that NX schematic. And this is pulling in the component, or this exporting default is going to tell, give some metadata to Storybook for this component. And then this is our first story here. We see that it has this module metadata, and this is going to take anything that, or most things that an Angular module will. So if we need to add some imports, maybe we're using Angular material or something, or a material input, we could add an import there. We could make declarations here if we needed to show an example with it using a pipe. And we can also use providers, most things that would belong in an Angular module. And here we're going to tell it which component we're actually working with. And then here are the props. And these are the knobs that Storybook has for us. And these will let us actually control in real time what the story. And I'll show you that in just a second. Okay. So now we've got this all configured and installed. Let's go ahead and run it. So I'm going to do nx run, and I'm going to give it the project name. It's editable as my project, and Storybook. And this is pretty quick. One of the nice things about Storybook is it's a pretty fast regeneration time, which you'll see when you make changes to your component or your story. It's pretty lightning quick, and it also has hot module reloading. So it'll save the state of your story as you make changes, which is kind of nice. Usually takes about 15 or 30 seconds. Unless I'm live, then it takes much longer. And so I'm going to give a little hint here. In our text component, we kept it pretty light, but one of the things we actually did have to use was Directive form module to pull in that form control that we're using. So if I go ahead and click on this, pull in our story, and we'll see that it's not working. And we get a little hint up here. Can't bind to form control since it isn't a known property of input. So does anyone have any guesses of what's going on? Does anyone want to take a stab at it? This is an error we've seen in Angular. This is the error we get when we forget to import our reactive forms module. So if I go over to back to my story and I add reactive forms to my import, and okay, it did import it. And we'll see that right away it's working again. So that's a pretty fast refresh cycle. And so now down here, this is we can see what these knobs are actually doing for us. We see that we have these were the props here, because the way we set up our props, or the props were set up for us by the NX schematic. We have these controls down here that we can mess with. And like I said before, these take any valid color. So if I change this a little bit, you can see the color updating in real time. And then if I change this from editing to displaying, we can see that we're changing what the state looks like, and our text value, we can update that as well. And so these knobs are driving all of our inputs on our controller, or on our component. And this is nice, but it's not great, because I have to kind of figure out what a valid color is going to be. And it doesn't really convey anything to anyone using this. And additionally, I have to type out the name of my state, just how it doesn't convey the 3 different states I have. I just have to know that. And so that's not really great documentation or really super helpful for anyone. So let's make some changes. So the first thing we're going to do is, this is the story that was generated for us. And this is showing a couple different states, but it's going to be helpful for us for our unit testing and our end-to-end testing to kind of have, and even to work with our designers, to have different examples of each state. So I'm going to want to make a couple stories, and I want a story for each to represent each state we have, one for displaying, one for editing, and one for updating. And so I'm going to make some changes here. I'm going to change name. Oh, one thing I wanted to show real fast. Wrong one. So over here in our default export here, we have this title, right? And we'll see that this title corresponds to what's in our nav bar over here. So if I put a space in here and save, we see that that gets updated. And so that's kind of nice. So if we want to make any changes to the labels or whatever, we see that's pretty easy. But what else another thing I can do is, let's say I want to segregate these out a little bit and have maybe kind of a section for components, and then a section for maybe features or something like that. So now if I hit save, all I have to do is create a, put the name I want the directory to be, or the parent field, I guess, and use a front slash. And each front slash is going to kind of make a new grouping. So now I added that components to it, and so we see we have this new kind of group here. For some reason when I do this, sometimes I have to refresh. So now we see that we have this new grouping for components, and now if I use this prefix of components front slash on any other components I create, that would group all of the stories under that components navigation. So this is a nice way to organize stuff. And even if you want to dramatically change kind of the navigation structure, you only have to go through in one place and change it. Where in my demo app that I had, if I wanted to completely refactor the navigation structure, it would take a lot of work. I'd have to change a lot of routes. I have to move folders around, change imports, and all kinds of stuff. But this way I can easily kind of completely revamp how everything's organized, and it's just takes one change in each component I want to change. So that's kind of a nice feature. Okay. Going back to creating a state for each, a story for each state. So this isn't a lot of boilerplate for a story, but we can do a little better. We can create a template, and we can use that template and reproduce it, and show and make small changes to that template for each story if we need to. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this export keyword off, because Storybook is going to try to create a story for any function that's exported out of it. So we're going to take that export. We're going to call this template now. And I'm going to go ahead and pull in a couple interfaces from Storybook /Angular, because we like to, we're Angular people and we like to have strong typing. And so I'm going to give it some types. I'm going to say that this is going to be a story of type text component. And this is going to, now we're going to be able to pass some arguments into here. pass some args, and those are also type text component. And this is going to return an I story. And this will just help us keep this strongly typed down here. So now most everything is still the same. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these knobs for now, because we're going to use a newer API called controls, and it's just a little bit less verbose and gives you a little bit more control. And so I'm going to want to be able to modify a lot of different things, but I want my my text value for my component to be the same in each of these, because that's not the piece I'm worried about showing changes on. So just to avoid a little bit of repetition, I'm going to go ahead and set this property here. I'm just going to call it initial value. And then I'm going to spread whatever other args I pass to this across my props. And these props are what we use to drive the properties on the component. Okay, so now if we take a look at Storybook again, we'll see that we have no stories because we took away that export. So let's create another story, and we want this one to represent my editing state that we showed before, or actually we'll say displaying. So we're going to call this displaying, and then we're going to use this function up here, say template.bind, and bind is going to return a new instance of that function, and all we pass it is what we want to use for a this value, and we're just going to pass an empty string, or I'm sorry, an empty object into here. And now we're going to say displaying.args equals state displaying. And so this is going to tell this template that we want the value of state to be displaying. And again, that's just going to show the value in that paragraph tag with that edit icon on it. So if we open up Storybook again, we can see, open up this folder, we see that we have a new story under our text component directory here, and the story is displaying. We see that it's in that state that we talked about. And those knobs are gone since we took those away. And so that's just one of the states. So now we can easily, we want to make another one for editing and updating. So I just, this one will be my editing story. And I just changed, luckily all my my names overlap, so I made it easier to make this switch. And then I'm going to call this updating. And so now we can see that we have a story for each one of those states. So we have a displaying state. Oh. So I think I used an old instance, and so I had the wrong path in it. So we see we have this displaying, we have editing, and we have updating state all shown. And so this gives a little bit more of a clue as to what values are available in there. It's not great yet, but we'll get there. So the next thing I want to talk about was using some of these pieces that are in Essentials, the Storybook Essentials library. So to update that, we're going to go through, and we took out, let's see, here we go. Under our .storybook directory in the main.js, we have this add-on knobs that we were using. We're going to change that to Essentials to use the Essentials add-on. And like I said before, it's kind of a conglomeration of some helpful add-ons. And then down in our Storybook folder under editable, we're going to go in this preview folder, and we're going to take out everything that was configuring the knobs for us. Okay, so now that is set up. And this is, the next piece is kind of the roughest part. So let's take a look at what that did for us. So we took out our knobs and we added the essentials. I think I need to rerun Storybook now that I changed kind of some of the base setup here. Okay, doesn't want to stop. So I'm going to have to rerun Storybook, NX run the project name, and then Storybook. That'll take a second. Let's see. There we go. And so there's a few things bundled into Essentials. One of them is that controls API that I talked about a little bit, that is replacing knobs. Another one is an add-on called Actions, and that is what we're going to use to monitor some of our outputs. And then this should be almost done. And it's also going to give us some docs as well. And we're going to need to do a little bit of work to configure those. And I'm seeing I'm running out of time. It took a little longer live than it did practicing. Here we go. So now refresh this. And you'll see we get a few things for free. All I did was change the add-on from knobs to actions, and we have some docs generated for us. They're not great yet. That's going to be the next step. And then in our canvas, we have a few more features. We can change the background color from light to dark. We can add some grid in there. We can mess with our viewport in here. And we're set up to use controls and actions now. And right now, it's only showing us as having one control of the state, and that's being, driven, populated by this. But we can auto-generate controls for each one of our each of our properties on the component, if Storybook understands a little bit more about the component. And to do that, we need something that helps with documentation. And I know I'm running out of time, so I'll just do this last piece and then kind of jump to the end here. So to do that, we need something to generate the documentation, like I said. So I'm going to use another plugin from NX. This one is a community made plugin. So there's, I'm running NX add twitware /compodoc. And so NX has plugins that they made themselves. And they also have plugins made by the community. And this is one of the community ones. And this is going to install compodoc and configure it for us. And compodoc is another tool that's great for documenting Angular libraries. You can find it at compodoc.app. And you can go to the live demo. You can look at it a little bit. There's so this is all generated from some fake app, and you can take a look at the modules. It'll show you, give an idea of how components inside the modules relate to each other. And if you go to one of the components inside of it, you can, it'll tell you some information about each of the properties on it, like the inputs. You can look at the source, and it makes use of JS doc. So we'll see that this title property has some JS documentation. And so when we look at the title property in our info, it says application main title there. When we go down into the properties, the title has this definition of application main title. So CompoDoc does a really nice job of taking your JS doc decorators and creating some documentation out of them. And so in addition to creating this site like this, you can also configure it, excuse me, to export a JSON file with this information, not in a site. So I'm done running this. Oh, it's not done yet. It's almost done. And so after this command is done, we just have to tell it to, we have to configure the project. So we'll just say nx run editable, I'm sorry, no, nx g for generate at twitware compodoc config. So another long generation or another long command. And so this is going to tell it how to, I think I got a typo in there. And so all this did was update one file, our Angular JSON file. And it created a builder here. So we have some builders set up for our storybook, and it made a new one for CompoDoc. And all this is doing is saying, when you run this CompoDoc command, export it as a JSON file, not as the HTML files like the web page we saw a second ago. Export it as JSON and put it in the dist CompoDoc editable folder. And so, so this is going to, we can set this up so where it watches our component files, and as they change, the JSON here will change with it, the config or the exported JSON will change with it. But this is like the kind of ugliest part of this demo here is we want to configure Storybook to watch that JSON change and reconfigure itself whenever the CompoDoc output changes. So I'm going to paste this in here and talk about real fast. So before we had some commands for our Storybook. This Storybook is in watch mode. The build Storybook is what you run when you want to distribute it, like just publish it somewhere. And now we have our CompoDoc command here. And this new one I'm calling StoryDoc. This is what we're going to run when we want to generate the documentation and then tell Storybook to use that documentation. So, and all this is going to do, it's going to run that CompoDoc command, telling it to output JSON and run in watch mode. And then it's going to run that Storybook command right after. And so I just need to change this from project to editable, because that's the project we're on. And then there's two more pieces of configuration we have to do. We have to go back into our preview file where we deleted everything before to tell it not to use knobs. And we're going to tell it two things. Or one thing really. We're gonna pull in the set compo.doc JSON function from Storybook, and then we're gonna pass it that JSON that's generated. And so, so this is just reaching in that dist folder that we talked about earlier and grabbing that documentation. And then the last piece is to go into our story. Here it is, here's our story. And up in this default object that we're exporting, we want to make this component property, add this component property. That's not what I wanted. Component, and we're going to pass it text component again. And that is going to tell Storybook which docs we want to use. So now I need to rerun Storybook. Oh, and instead of using nxrun editable Storybook, we're going to use that new command we just created called storydoc. And it's going to first run the compo.doc :JSON watch, and then run Storybook. Point it to it. And I know we're basically out of time. We've been out of time, but we'll see what this gives us here in a second. Does anyone have any questions while this builds? And I know I kind of ran through one of the most confusing parts. The best thing to do will be to go to pull up that repo to get the little bit clearer picture of the commands that I was running and the configuration changes I made. So now this is rerun, and we'll see that we have some new controls because those docs were generated. Storybook was able to look at them and say, oh, we actually have 3 inputs. So now it has a clear idea of what inputs we have. It knows what outputs we have. There's not a lot of stuff on that yet. But now if we go look at the docs, we can see that we have quite a bit more here. We can see that our state, it knows the type that our state is. It knows the type of our text value. And if I go into my actual component and I add some detail, like my voice does that. So if I say change the background color. So this is not a great description, but it's a description. And we go look at our docs now, and you should see after it finishes building, that now we have a description for that input. And so if we go through in JSDoc, the rest of our properties will very easily have a nice description for each of our properties here. And I can change, so it's already pulling in the JSDoc I put for the component, and that's up here. So we could put some long description in the text component. And there's a lot more to do with this. Actually, if you keep going through here, I'm gonna have to stop here because we're at an hour now. But we can actually change, here, I'm gonna do one thing real fast. This is the last thing I promise. I go back into my story. So right now, all of my controls here are just string. So we're still at that same situation where if I don't know an appropriate value, it's not very helpful. So I can make a real quick configuration here in the story. And so here I'm going to pass there's this property called archetypes, and you can give a little bit clearer definition of what each control should look like. So I'm going to tell it that the background color is a control of type color, and then that my state is a control of type select, and it has options of displaying, editing, and updating. And I'm going to save, and now it takes these from those string values. So for the background color, you have this cool color picker that you can change and see it update. And then now my state, we can see exactly what properties are available here. And as I change it, you can see it change live. Oh. Okay, I'm gonna have to stop there, but I do have, in the repo, I have examples for how you can monitor the outputs of a component and how you can combine components in a story, as well as how to enhance documents with MDX, which is that markdown language I was talking about before. Does anyone have any questions?
We'll give people just a minute for questions. So while people are revving up for questions, I want to remind everybody of our upcoming content calendar. Nathan, do you want to show? Yeah. So just to remind everybody to come take a look at oasisdigital.com. Of course, if you're watching this on video, this information will have changed, but it'll still be on oasisdigital.com somewhere for you to spot, to see all of our various upcoming events, more deep technical talks like this, some more introductory talks. We have our Angular clinic and so on. So hopefully by stalling a minute there, I've given time for people to have questions. So I'm going to blink out here and leave room for people to come in.
I know that there's a lot of configuration in there, and I tried to keep it as minimal as possible, but Storybook really is driven by configuration. And so what I went through in an hour took quite a while to figure out, because of there's some disparate information on how to set these up, and their API just changed recently. So it took a while to really nail everything down.
Where will I be able to find this recording so I can look at this later?
Yeah, we usually post it it usually takes about a couple weeks to a month to get out. It kind of depends on how much editing Kyle has to do, how many ums he has to cut out.
All right, thanks.
And I want to post the link to the walkthrough as well. Find the chat in here. And so I just posted the link to the walkthrough there. So each step that I went through is outlined, and the places you need to change it are outlined. So you should hopefully be able to go through it relatively easily and watch things change and see what's doing what. Nobody has any questions? I flew through that.
Takes a couple passes, but thank you. Thank you for presenting.
Of course.
So Nathan, a quick question.
Yeah.
Have you guys used Storybook? Have you seen experience with it? Is this sort of theoretical at this point, or is the general feedback that, hey, this is a real productivity adder in what we were doing with our UI?
There are definitely positives and negatives to it. I have not used it on a client project. I've only just been really digging in this last month and a half. And like I said before, the biggest issue was the biggest problem with it is that they're trying to help or like work with so many frameworks. I feel like that it's really difficult for them to keep their documentation in line. And it's some of the things that were kind of a struggle in this work much easier and with React because it's built with React. So there's much more configuration you have to do for Angular. I can go over the positives and negatives of at the top of the repo. Some of the pros of Storybook is you have, like you saw, you had isolated development, demos, and unit testing. And so that can be really helpful if you have a lot of states that you need to showcase for either clients or shareholders and designers. Development is actually really nice in it. When I was developing that simple component, I actually used Storybook for the entire time for development because it just rebuilt so fast, and it was nice just to have it isolated like that. Like I said here, it's fast, and then you have hot module reloading. Another thing is, so you can publish different pieces of it separately, which is nice. So the docs, that docs page, you can publish that to some site, some docs website, and then you could have maybe other parts of Storybook that are more helpful for developers published to, or stakeholders published to another site. So you can separate it out like that. Markdown can be used. I didn't get to the Markdown part because everything just kind of takes so long to configure. But you can use Markdown to provide a lot of detail to your documentation. Lots of supported frameworks, and they're constantly adding new features. But some of the pros are also cons, where it's evolving rapidly, so it's changing. I wouldn't say a lot, but there's been a couple big changes in the last couple of years that people had to account for. And I think it's stabilizing now because it's been a while for a little longer. But that can be confusing because one of the big changes was about a year ago. And so you'll have a lot of information kind of doing it the old way. And one of the last things is the cons about it is controlling the state of your story is difficult, where in my example app, I showed how the app component can control the child component, and a good example of that, but it's difficult to get that with Storybook. And that's why we kind of went with that one story for each state of the component.
Gotcha. Yeah, so like, what would, so is there a competitor to Storybook besides someone, just, custom creating demo apps, et cetera? Was there something else besides demo apps that people used to use and Storybook has really brought it all together?
Not that I've seen. I've seen a couple hand rolled, and I've looked for a while because I kind of pointed to Compodoc a little bit, and I really like Compodoc, but it's difficult to put usage examples in. Kind of like, to me, like the holy grail of documentation would be something like Angular Material has here,
Right.
where you can get usage examples, you can see it in action, and easily view the code. And then if you want to go to StackBlitz, and it has a link to show a very concise interactive example of StackBlitz. And so if they would release whatever they're doing, that would be just the bee's knees. But until then, I'm digging into Storybook and seeing how I can get there with that.
Gotcha. Because we have a very large UI control set, and to this point, we've just created a custom demo app, right? That it can be very tedious to show off every state, every thing that your control can do, and then also try to convey the code that a user has to do to instantiate or use that control, et cetera. And you can get very custom and very elaborate, but it's very tedious, and therefore half our controls don't really show what we want, and the other half are probably out of date, things like that, right? So this is a great way to sort of automate and quantify some of that effort.
Yeah, people are starting to drop off. So I wanted to
Yeah.
say thank you for coming for people dropping off. Certainly, though, Zooms have no time limit. So Nathan, if you have a long answer is great. I did want to throw in for Jeff there. We actually have other customer projects, and I think somebody might have even said something in the chat here that are doing this for exactly the scenario you're talking about. And I happen to know from talking to those folks that it's both broadly popular and very effective for like documenting, like, here are the specific states, how do they look, and so on. But and again, everybody's welcome to say as long as you want, so keep on Q&Aing as long as there are questions.
Yeah, if others have it, don't let me hog the microphone here. I'm just curious, just how useful is this? Is it worth the investment? There's going to be overhead, clearly, as Nathan, you're experiencing, to configure everything. But in the long run, is the return a lot more than just keeping on the path that we are, right? So
yeah, and it becomes especially difficult when you already have a demo app there, because in order to replace that demo app, you have to have at least everything that your demo app is already doing. So that's where the deciding really becomes difficult. A good approach is probably to just start with a few components, and maybe like some set of the components that are used most often. And if you're in an organization or something, maybe share those with the teams that are using them and get some feedback on how they feel about it. It is really nice for development, like I said, because it's fast and it's isolated. You don't have to create some new route, so it speeds up development, and it makes showing all those different states a lot easier, because as anyone that's worked on a component library knows, that building the component is and having it do everything you need is maybe 20% of the work, where the rest is testing it, documenting all the different states and everything that it can have in it, and showing, creating a place in your demo app for it. And so this will reduce that quite a bit. And once everything's configured, it's a nice system for displaying, working with your stakeholders, working with your design team, implementing your tests, and making sure you have everything captured. So there's no best one yet, in my opinion.
yeah, this looks interesting. Probably worth spending some time sussing it out, because I can see the pros far outweigh the effort, I think, to make our showcase more storybook based than what we've been currently doing. So, all right, thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.
I have a question. More and more people are focusing on lazy loading modules, now lazy loading components. Is it can Stack Storybook pick on lazy loading components?
I'd have to mess with it. I'd have to have a good use case too. I mean, because the point, a lazy loaded component is going to act the same way as a normal component. It's just you're setting it up a little bit differently, so that's not used until it's absolutely necessary, or not imported. So you might be able to, but I don't know what benefit you would get out of it. I guess.
I just interested in some of our cases, that how we use components. For example, in some cases we're using G content to transcode the content that comes for example, in your demo, you have this small icon. We can create a like component and transclude it, so we can make other adjustments to image, to title on it. So is by setting this like child parent approach, is it easy to set up examples on Storybook?
Yeah, I'd have to look into the lazy loaded. I would think it would work pretty similar, but I've only read about lazy loading Angular components a couple times about a year ago, so I haven't had to do it. I don't have a lot of experience with it. But I remember it being very straightforward. It was one of those things that it was so straightforward that I didn't really study it too much. Sorry, I don't have a more definitive answer for you. I didn't try that.
It's okay. Just wondering, but for implementation cases that we have, and because in our scenario we have a designer that wants to just configure all the components, configure all those stylings of material design. He just wants to pick on everything. So I was wondering, maybe Storybook is quite good fit. For now, we just learning him how to code on Angular. It goes well, but still maybe it's another way to do this more easily for him, maybe to make his life a little bit easier.
Yeah, and you could probably take a couple of days and set up a few components and kind of see if it's valuable for that situation, and if it's not, then kind of have your answer.
One comment on that: if you're trying to just more orient like new developers to your project, you might want to try something like Code Tour, an extension in VS Code. Whereas I think your demo today is more about exposing your component to outside consumers of your library, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What I was slowly working towards at the end was to kind of help consumers have a clear picture of how they can configure each component, and then working on fleshing out the documentation a little bit more, and trying to integrate that a little bit more seamlessly into the development process. And that's one of the things that Storybook gives you, is you can kind of work that into your development pipeline a little bit easier, because you can use it to actually develop with. And then as you kind of can create your stories as you develop, as opposed to creating all the building the component and then going through and documenting it after the fact. Anybody else have any more questions?
Did you ask if there has to be 70 more questions, or somebody has more questions?
Only if there's 70 questions.
I'm all out, brother. It's very good, Nathan. Thanks for doing this.
Of course.
Yes, thanks.
Struggling to get a lot of content in without going too fast. And
I got some good tips, so I will later take a look on your repository. So thank you for demo. It was great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Take care, Nathan. I'm going to drop off. It was very good.
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I should have said this in the very.
Do we have any more questions left, or did we make it to the end of the questions?
For anyone that's still around, I should have said this in the very beginning. I even had a note for it. We're actually going to be doing a workshop, a free workshop for ngConf and it's going to be an extension of this material. So if you're going to NG Conf, you can take a deep dive for free.
Okay, well, I think yeah, the people are dropping off pretty quickly here. So I guess that's the end. So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Nathan, for presenting, and I guess see everybody next month.
Thanks, everybody.